we have one #1 bestseller, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, is a painful, shocking book which conveys not how the West was won, but how it was lost. I mean, magnificent work, the real story of the settling of the Indian side of the ledger. Every Indian will something to read this book and will wish he had written it. I think this one might be worth reading. I don't think this one's going to be a burning one. Let's start reading a little bit here. Let's read the introduction. Here's a nice map. It says Sioux and Shawnee Campaign 1865 to 1890. Since the exploratory journey of Lewis and Clark to the Pacific coast early in the 19th century, the number of published accounts describing the opening of the American West has risen into the thousands. The greatest concentration of recorded experience and observation came out of the 30-year span between 1860 and 1890. The period conveyed by this book, it was an incredible era of violence, greed, audacity, sentimentally undirected exuberance, and almost reverent attitude toward the idea of personal freedom for those who already had it. During that time, the culture and civilizations of the American Indian was destroyed, and out of that time came virtually all the greatness of the American West. Tales of fur traders, mountain men, steamboat pilots, gold seekers, gamblers, gunmen, cavalrymen, cowboys, harlots, missionaries, school homesteaders. Only occasionally was the voice of the Indian heard, and then more often than not it was recorded by the pen of a white man. The Indian was the dark menace of the myths, and even if he had known how to write in English, where would have found a printer or a publisher? Where would it have found a printer or publisher? Yet they are not all lost. Those Indian voices of the past, a few authentic accounts of American Western history were recorded by Indians either in photographs or in translated English, and some managed to get published in obscure journals, pamphlets, and books of small circulation in the late 19th century, when the white man's curiosity about Indian survivors of the wars reached a high point. Enterprising newspaper reporters frequently interviewed warriors and chiefs, gave them an opportunity to express their opinion on what was happening in the West. The quality of these interviews varied greatly depending upon the abilities of the interpreters or upon the inclination of the Indians to speak freely. Some feared reprisal for telling the truth, while others delighted in hoaxing reporters with full tales of shaggy dog stories. Contemporary newspaper statements by Indians must therefore be read with skepticism, although some of them are masterpieces of irony and others burn with outbursts of poetic fury. Among the richest sources of first-person statements by Indians was the records of treaty councils and other formal meetings with civilian and military representatives of the United States government. Isaac Pitman knew stenographic system was coming into vogue during the second half of the 19th century, and when Indians spoke in council, a recording clerk sat beside the official interpreter. Even when the meetings were in remote parts of the West, someone usually was available to write down the speeches, and because of the slowness of the translation process, much of what was said could be recorded in longhand. Interpreters quite often were half-bloods who knew spoken languages of but seldom could read or write. Like most oral people, they and the Indians depended upon imagery to express their thoughts, so that the English translations were filled with graphic smiles and metaphors of the natural world. If an eloquent Indian had a poor interpreter, his words might be transformed to flat prose, but a good interpreter could make poor speakers sound poetic. Most Indians leaders spoke freely and candidly in councils with white officials, and as they became more sophisticated in such matters during 1870s and 80s, they demanded the right to choose their own interpreters and recorders. In this later period, all members of the tribes were free to speak, and some of the older men chose such opportunities to recount events they had witnessed in the past, or to sum up the histories of their peoples. Although the Indians who lived through this doomed period of their civilization have vanished from the earth, millions of their words are preserved in official records. Any of more important council proceedings were published in government documents and reports. Out of all the sources of almost forgotten oral history, I have tried to fashion a narrative of the conquest of the America West as the victims experienced, usually their own words whenever possible. Americans who have always looked westward when reading about this period should read this book facing eastward. This is not a cheerful book, but history has a way of intruding upon the present, and perhaps those who read it will have a clearly understanding of what the American Indian is. By knowing what he was, they may be surprised to hear words of gentle reasonableness coming from the mouths of Indians stereotyped in the American myth as ruthless savages. They may learn something about their own relationship to the earth from a people who were true conversationalists. The Indians knew that life was equated with the earth and its resources. That America was a paradise, and they would not comprehend why the intruders from the east were determined to destroy all that was Indian as well as American itself. And if the readers of this book should ever chance to see the poverty and hopelessness and the squalor of a modern Indian reservation, they may find it possible to truly understand the reason why. Well, this looks like a good one to read. I shall not be there